Okay, then I would say welcome, good morning or good evening to the next Ask the Expert session. Today in the US time zone or in the US, how to say, convenient way for the Western time zones. They're trying to ask random questions today. Whatever comes to your mind, what you think is interesting to others, I'll try to cover. If things get too complicated, I will maybe just write it down and answer it offline, or try to add something to the chat or training notes. We will be able to share later. And if the number of people remains small, then we just get started right now. So I just post this this board again. What it will look like is something like this. And you should be able to see this kind of empty board, and that's some kind of tool to visualize or to just gather the questions that are coming up and to prioritize. Because if there are too many, we need to somehow find an order, and this is some kind of voting system where we can vote for things that sound most interesting. So say how to start a ZK project in the IDE. Now, if this is my question, I post it here, it will appear in the middle, and I'll just invite you to post also your questions. When you sign up here, I think you don't need to create a login, just provide a name and then join the board. And this is quite an open board. In the end, I will export these questions so we have them on the record. And there are a few phases. Phase 1 is gathering questions. Phase 2 is rating, or ranking, or voting. And the phase 3 is then just answering the questions. So whatever you have in mind, paste it here. But I think we don't need it if we are only 2 persons in the in the chat. So Daniel and Francisco, if you just want to paste your questions, I think we can skip all the other phases and just answer them right away. So I'll move this to the side. You can write your question, I said, at the line at the bottom here. It's not really easy to see sometimes, so just always indicate, write something, put the button, and I will just answer the first one: how to start the ZK project in the IDE, or introduce the project, and then you can think about what's interesting for you in ZK, because I haven't prepared anything. This is some kind of random session where we just have a chance to talk to members of the community and see what's interesting and how we can help immediately, or point to the documentation that's relevant for this question, just to have this kind of dialogue without having to prepare something, so we can do this more often. And last time it was an experiment. This time also we just try to see how far we can get. And let's get started. So what I did is, like in the first session, I always have some kind of test project so we can demonstrate something live. It contains a README, and the README just explains the steps. In this case, I chose a Gradle project, and it has a few a simple setup. It has a project name, just a project name. It has some dependencies, the latest ZK version that was released, some test case, a JUnit version, an embedded Jetty, so we can run directly without having to copy the WAR file somewhere, and then some other dependencies that are used to in the project. And the build is also the same, similar. I think Gradle is like Maven. You specify your dependencies. Implementation is similar to the compile dependency, compile scope in Maven. There's test dependencies, and one thing I like about Gradle is that you can have custom class paths, and this is my runtime that is only used for running the Jetty, so it doesn't affect any of the build artifacts. It's only for me in the IDE when testing. I have a command line task that will run the Jetty runner, but in the same way, you can run the same class also from the IDE. So what you have is a main class which will run the Jetty. You specify your context path or none if you don't want one, and where the location is of your web application based on the source, so you don't have to package your WAR file. And this just corresponds to my source main web app project. And I have a run configuration, which just reflects the same thing. I have a main class runner. Don't worry, it's deprecated as of the current Jetty version, but I raised already a ticket, and it sounded like they tried to maintain it throughout Jetty 10 or 11. So they tried to keep this and not deprecate it, because there's a bit more of the community that likes this feature. And I hope it's getting undeprecated soon, so it doesn't look so weird. Then I'll just specify again a path, the module name, which is just the module name Freestyle Training 2, and the location. So these are the program arguments for the runner. And the working directory, I prefer to have just a variable here, but somehow there is a bug in IntelliJ right now that doesn't work. So I need to specify that myself. Module underscore working dir. And then we see a preview, or we see there's no error, so it finds this. So this variable actually resolves even though it's not listed here. But also I raised a ticket with IntelliJ and they will fix this in the next version. And something similar you can do in Eclipse. Configure a run class, a working directory, and the parameters. And then we run our project. We will see it's starting a small, we see it's starting up Jetty in the version we requested. Where is the Jetty version? Here it says Jetty deprecated. Okay. Here it's starting the Jetty version. We specified the latest one just last month. I'm using Java 14 right now, but you can also use Java 11, Java 8. So far, it didn't make any difference to me whenever I tried something. And it's starting up very quickly, a bit faster when I'm not screen sharing. So around something around 2.5 seconds. Here it's 4.2 seconds, which is okay. And after it's running, we can access this in the browser. So we just open the browser, go to localhost. If you don't know the path you specified, it will list all the context paths. So we just go to the context path and it will start loading the index file. And we have a running ZK demo project, which does something easy. And that's the web app index.zul, just a simple MVVM Zul file. It has a view model, it has a few command buttons, and it has some data bindings to output the response and some data binding to get the text. Yeah, and from this moment on, I wonder if there are any questions or anything that motivated you to join today that I can help you with. Since we don't have too many participants, I think we are still only 2. Oh no, there's more now. There's more joining. Good. I hope. Oh, the participant list doesn't work anymore. I'll just paste the link again. So it's time for you to ask me something. Let's see if there's anything coming up. Not yet. So I already covered how to run the project. So you can post the question in the chat or in the board, whatever is convenient to you, because that's the purpose of this session, to answer questions. Take your time. And if you don't have any questions, I might just introduce a few new features that are coming up with CK9 9.5. Like in the last session, we talked about the theme template. Maybe someone of you missed it and they are interested in this again, because that's something I can quickly demonstrate out of nothing. Or anything else you're interested in?
Yeah, let's give them like 3 minutes to see if they have any questions. So if you have questions, just type at the end. Yeah.
Okay, I set a timer to 3 minutes. So if you have joined this board, you can type your question at the bottom here. And whatever you type, it will appear in the top of the list. And you can delete it again or edit it. Don't make the title too long, because then I won't be able to read all of it. And it should be short so that everyone understands what this is about. And if I need more details, I will maybe ask it, but just write down the topic and we will then vote in the next phase. Okay, what can I suggest? What else could I suggest? I wonder, is this working? So usually we get lots of requests, lots of questions, and they come, and then we have to vote. Is there anyone of you not being able to hear me or see what's on the screen? So I have this bug in Zoom. When I'm in the screen sharing, I can't see the participant lists anymore, and then I don't know if someone's maybe raising their hand, or if they are all muted, or if they are not connected via audio. Maybe Jean can double check.
I think everyone is connected. We have 4 participants now.
Okay. I mean, everyone joined the board, so
1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yep.
What else could I? You can add actively to this board. If this is new, you should all have this input field at the bottom to commit your additional question. What can I say? Oh, there's coming. This is working only if I have. This is working. The only thing is I have no question now. Oh, then it's okay. Then maybe you were interested in questions of other people joining, because these kind of freestyle training sessions are for open questions, where the listeners are. Okay, this is already a good question. How can I initialize the WebSocket in the Spring Boot? Okay, now we have a few more minutes. Time's up. Okay, then we just go to the next phase. Why not? Mark as done and go to the next phase. I think we don't need to vote a lot. I think you still can add items, but normally I would say we vote now, since you only have one question. And we just care about this one. You can still add more questions. Yeah, so it's still open, the board. So I'll just start with the first one. How can I initialize a WebSocket feature in a Spring Boot project? The thing is, in Spring Boot, first thing is I haven't prepared the Spring Boot project here right now, but it's no problem. We can create one, or I can show you the example project, and you enable it in the same way as you enable it in a ZK application. The first thing you need is to, of course, enable the listener in ZK. Yeah, there is a WebSocket web app init, which will enable the feature. And you need to do a few things in Spring Boot, which I can show in the dedicated example project. I think, where is it? Plus ZK Spring Boot, because I have an example that does exactly this. There is the Spring Boot demos, and there is the Spring Boot demo jar project, which I recently updated to use the latest Spring Boot version. I think there's a 2.3.2, but I assume it's going to be backwards compatible. So what you do is you clone this project, or you clone this project, and inside the source we have the configuration, source main resources, for example. I think it doesn't contain anything relevant here. Oh, yeah, it does. We have so no specific configuration in the application properties needed. In the meta info, ZK, there is a ZK XML, which will enable the web app in it. So this is a ZK XML in the similar way to, or in the same way as the ZK XML here. ZK, since the beginning of ZK, I think, or at least since ZK5, we have the ability for multiple ZK XMLs in different jar files. So you can have configuration, not just in a webinf folder, but also in any jar in meta info ZK. Somewhere on the class path, if you have this these folder meta info ZK, you can have a ZK XML and multiple of these. You can give them, or in a jar file, you have to give them a config name. So whatever your jar file is about, your module, you give it the config name, and then you can provide the same listeners and configuration as in any other ZK XML. So I enable the WebSocket web app init for this example. And the other thing you need to do is it needs to be a ZK EE project enterprise, the ZK Enterprise Edition, which has the built-in WebSocket support. And inside the application, I think the automatic config will detect the WebSockets by default. So in my application, I don't do anything. I just say it's Spring Boot application, and the auto config will just detect the WebSockets. And I think the default is enable WebSockets and disable it via configuration if you need to. So that's all you do. You specify the ZK XML and you enable the initialization listener for the ZK application, and the Spring Boot integration will do the rest for you. And where this magic happens is inside the autoconfig project. There is the automatic configuration. The first part how this happens is in the meta info. There are this magic file Spring Factories. This tells Spring Boot which files to scan, and it will scan through these 4 files that are provided inside the autoconfig project. And one of them is the ZK Max auto configuration, which is for the ZK Enterprise Edition. And if we look into these configuration files, you will find them just in the class path. There is the ZK auto configuration, homepage configuration. Maybe we start from the beginning. The auto configuration will register ZK servlets. For example, the HTML layout servlet, the richlet filter, which is optional. By default, it's disabled. You can have some testing support. If you're running test cases, it will detect that the testing modules are on the class path, and then it will do some specific configuration to the update servlet, because Zets doesn't support a custom Ajax URL. So it will just overwrite your configuration there. And also it will instantiate the session listener, the same thing that you do in a web XML normally. If we go up one level to the ZK Max auto configuration, here you see it also does a configuration on demand. So you see it will only execute this configuration if the ZK EE jar is on the class path, the ZK Max jar. It will just search for this class. And if this is not there, this configuration will be skipped. And here it sets this filter configuration for WebSockets for Spring Boot. And also the commit async servlet, so the asynchronous server push, which is an alternative option for the WebSocket server push. So basically, you don't have to do anything. It will just happen automatically if you use the autoconfig. So maybe that's what you were missing. We have this autoconfig project which does all this for you. I wonder, does this answer your question, or would you like to see this running?
Thank you, Robert. I think
yes.
You answered my question, so yeah, it's okay.
And if you want to disable it, here's the configuration of the properties we provide from the autoconfig project. And by default, WebSockets are enabled, server push is enabled, and there's not really much that needs to be done. The rest is just happening automatically or is enabled by default or disabled. So it's really quite simple. And if we find features that are missing, we might add them. So if there are suggestions, let us know. So
okay,
just clone this project and run the demos. And how to run the demos is specified here. If you want to run this one I just showed you, was this one the Spring Boot demo jar, either with Maven or with Gradle. We have examples for both of them. And it's a submodule of the demo parent project here. So here's all these demos. Okay, cool. If this one was the question, then there's a new one. Perfect. What tips can you give us when optimizing the timing response when there are a lot of volume information in ZK project? Okay, maybe you need to specify a bit more. When there is a lot of volume. What is volume information? That's maybe. Yes. Okay, Jean just posted. So what do you mean by volume information? Optimize the timing response when there are a lot of volume information. Maybe you mean when there's a lot to download or when there are a lot of resources to download. Because optimizing is, I think, basically the opposite of what I'm showing in this demo project here is I'm disabling all the caches. So by default, these caches are enabled. So you disable your debug configuration. Yeah, you enable the caches. If you don't actively change the code, these switches are useful to optimize at least the behavior in the browser. And it's something we can look at. Maybe that's what you meant. If not, feel free to unmute yourself and clarify if I'm going in the wrong direction. But the first thing we can do is we just check what ZK is downloading, and maybe that's what you mean. We have several requests. ZK, just go to all. So whenever we load a ZK page, it will download lots of resources. Just refresh. And when running in the developer tools, by default, it's disabling the cache in the network tab. So we see all the download sizes of everything. And I could imagine this one is, if you're referring to the download volume, this one is quite large. 2.5 megabytes is the uncompressed size of the ZKWPD. And if we reload the page and the caches are disabled, it will download the same large files again. If we enable caches, it still doesn't do anything. It still doesn't cache anything because we have disabled the cache from a ZK perspective, from a ZK point of view. So what we should do is, when running in production, we just don't disable all these caches. Just stick with the default. And also the class web resource cache, disable. We don't use the debug JavaScript. We use minified code. And we save this, restart our server. Okay, and we go back into the browser, and then we compare. So we had 2.4 megabytes, which was the largest file here, which started downloading. So when we now, oops, something didn't start up. Wait, what did I do wrong? Main. Okay, that's my run config going crazy somehow. Edit configuration. Okay, this variable doesn't work. Something is broken. I just give it a name. Freestyle training. But it's optional. You don't have to put this. I just put this there to have a nice URL. Okay, I restarted the server. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 seconds, and now we should have a nice URL again here. Okay, so now we can compare. And now we see that the zkWPD is first uncompressed. We can see it would have been a 1.5 megabyte in contrast to 2.4 megabytes before, because now it's minified JavaScript code and it's using the compression. So now it's downloading only 205 kilobytes with a compressed stream. So this is a huge difference of 90% of bandwidth saved. And at the same time, now it's cacheable. So we should see a cache header. The headers in the response should say cache control, public max cache. So it has a cacheable header. So next time I reload the page, it should read this file from the browser cache. And as didn't promise too much, it's actually doing it. Yeah, it's reading this from memory cache. So I'm saving now. The only thing it has to download is a language WPD, because that's session specific, because user can change their session in the language, can change the language inside the session. So this one has to be downloaded, but it's a tiny file, 1.8 kilobyte. And as you see here, the only thing it downloaded was the ZUL file and the language, and everything else is cacheable. So that's the ideal case, that the resources are cacheable. And whenever you change your ZK version, then you will see that, wait, now I need to go just to JavaScript. When you change the ZK version, you should notice that the path changes. Here we have this tiny hash BFCE01D, and we can cache this optimistically, because next time you change the ZK version, this file will be different and has a different hash value there. And the risk of hash collisions is not zero, but since we don't produce millions of versions, it shouldn't collide. So if we switch to a different ZK version, just remember we had the BFCE started with. Yeah? If we change our ZK version, just go to the Gradle properties, say, oh, we want 0.1. Now we go back one version. And we stop. We just check that our Gradle project updates. It's still downloading, 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 downloading. Okay, switch the version. Now we can restart. Okay, indexes. Let's we just see ZK is now starting with 901 instead of 910. And if we go to the browser, and if I reload the page now, it should not get these values from the cache, because they have a different hash code. So BFCE was the previous one. We reload the page, and now zkWPD has a different code, B980A44. So now it's different. It's downloading the file once, and now it's in the browser cache. When I refresh, it will be cached and only downloads the 1.8 kilobyte. So basically, it should be already optimized. If the cache headers are not changed, the download size should only happen once, and the next time you go to the same page and your browser decided to read from its own cache, then you have already an optimized downloading speed or download size of your page. I wonder if this answers your question, or if you were trying to go in a different direction. Oh, there's more now. Cool. So was this your question? Or maybe just say yes or no, or okay, there's another question.
I think there's a follow-up. Yeah, this one follows.
Okay. I have a web application where I download a lot of information to a grid. I would like to know if there's any better ways to show large amounts of information. That's something different, because this is now about displaying a lot of UI elements of loading the default message when the default loading bar. Okay, let's go into this. Okay, a grid. Large amounts of data in a grid. If you one thing is, the more you download, the more data you try to display on one page, the more it has to download. Now this can't be cached because it's dynamic data that's coming from the server, and the browser doesn't know or doesn't cache these dynamic requests. So they will always be downloaded. So the main rule is try to avoid downloading too much or providing too much data, or enable some of the mechanisms in ZK to limit the number of data that is displayed. For example, in a grid, you can use paging, or you can use the load on demand feature when it's only downloading a section of the table, and then you have this white space above and below the currently displayed rows. And whenever you scroll to a different position, it will reload the contents for this white space. Then it doesn't have to display everything at once. Another thing is often it's not download speed, often it's rendering time. If the cells are very, very complicated, if the content of the cells is maybe dynamically sized, this may slow down significantly. So the one flag I mentioned is the, I think paging is obvious, but some people don't want paging, which I understand. There are sometimes paging is not desired, but that's the ideal thing. And then if you only render 50 elements out of 500 or 500,000, it can't scale up like the full list. So let's see, ZK load on demand grid. I think we have the performance tips article somewhere. Okay, we have this demo which we can open, yes, which is very simple and implementable on demand. What was it? ZK performance tips, right? I always forget the flag now. Right, here, yeah. The client asked that everything is just okay. Let me just go here. So in case you missed this one, use the compiled. Am I blind? Grid tree for huge data. I think it's this one. Using live data, turn on render on demand. This one. So if you are looking for the render on demand, if this is something you can use, that's one thing. Special number of rows rendered, blah, blah, special number of items rendered. And here it says no, this is not the one I want. RD grid, yeah, here, library property org, zcausul grid ROD, and you can use a custom attribute at the grid level. Okay, the question is now, if you say it's actually a hardware status report and the client asks that everything is displayed at once. If the user always needs everything, they must have very good eyes. I think they are interested in a few items to update at some point, or maybe there are some flashing lights or some color-coded images at certain positions, or some, I don't know, some numbers in a grid. I don't know if you, how much data are you talking about? Because is it millions of records that the user wants to see at once, or is it a few hundred? Let's see, what was the question? Maybe I missed something. The question was, what tips to have to optimize? There are lots of information in a grid. I would like to know if there's a better way to display large amounts of information, hundreds of records. And they don't want render on demand. So you can always disable render on demand. That's easy. And ideally, if not every of these hundreds of elements is changing every second, you can only update the ones you're interested in. You don't need to re-render the grid just to update the value of one row. If not everything is rendering, you can be very specific about what to update. Maybe you just change the value of a label instead of changing the value of a bean inside a list and then re-render the whole list. And you can be very, very precise about what changes. Depends a bit on how you render the grid. I think I won't be able to pull off an example in the time here. This might be a question for something hundreds of actual that is wow. It's currently distributed in grid pages which are changed from time to time. But then I wonder what is the problem, because a few hundred grid items shouldn't render too slowly. A few hundred. I think if you have a concrete example and it's slow, it would be best to debug first. First measure and see where is the problem. I have created an article of how to find what takes most of the time. So if you're not happy with performance, and we figure out again, yeah, if you don't think it's the best option, we need to find out what is not performing well enough on it.
The step-by-step troubleshooting.
Yes, I want the step-by-step troubleshooting. And once we identified, it's the grid that is consuming most of the time, then we can maybe find an alternative of for grid. Or if it's the network, then maybe we need to figure out how to limit the download bandwidth, whatever is taking the download size. Or if it's the client-side JavaScript rendering, there might be a bug or something that is not ideal in the browser, or some formatting that causes JavaScript to execute very slowly. Or what also can be the case is maybe the Java code takes a long time to gather all the information and update it. Could just be some problem on the code side that doesn't work ideally. So there's a few things we could look into. That's why I put up this step-by-step troubleshooting guide a few years ago, where we start at thinking what is taking long. You have some requests, some kind of update of the page that takes a long time, or something is slow, and you just figure out where is the problem. And the first thing I always look into is long-running requests, which means I look into my browser page. I look into the browser, the network tab again. I input something, I click a button, and I watch the, I thought, no, it's WebSockets here. Because we have enabled WebSockets, we can see the messages in the WebSocket, and I submit something and I get something back. And I see the timing here between the request and the response. This is a bit easier to see. Yeah, this is a bit easier to see when using Ajax and WebSockets, because Ajax has all this extra timing. In WebSockets, the request and the response are not connected to each other. But here we see at least the timing. See, the request was sent to the server at 566 milliseconds, and 14 milliseconds later the response came back. So at least there is not a problem with the network connection here. And then one thing you can do is check the performance. Yeah, just start the recording, process your operation, and stop the operation, and then you see a recording of what happened. And if you see any kind of long-running thing here, or in the where's the network frames, in any case, you see lots of things here. Somehow it's not displaying what I'm looking at, what I'm expecting to see. But if the tools work correctly, you will see something that is significantly slow here if there's a problem, and then it's something where we can analyze. And yeah, I'm usually the person to ask, because I wrote this article. Somehow the Chrome team changed the browsers a lot in the recent times, so sometimes it doesn't do what I expect it to do. And also this example is very quick because it doesn't do a lot, so we won't see any performance issues here. But that's where I start. I always look into the browser. I do my operation. I wait for my request to be sent, wait for the response, then measure how long is the request taking, how long is the client-side rendering, how long is the waiting time between the request and the response, in case it's a server-side issue. And then I go down this decision graph to see where I have the problem. Maybe the response is very big, or the request is very big because of some problem. And then I know which area to focus on. And if it's a server-side issue, then it's maybe good to check if there's maybe a different component that can be used that produces that it's easier to compose, or maybe it's a networking issue. Then maybe remove the bandwidth and maybe just send some JSON data, and only use the client engine to update components. Or if it's a JavaScript error, check which JavaScript code is running slowly and report a bug to us. If there is a badly if there's a badly scaling algorithm at client side, we usually fix these in the next version. So lots of details here. And what you expect to see is some kind of flame chart like this for something that takes a long time. You see the timing, which is some significant milliseconds here, or some kind of event graph. So there's lots of tools to measure, and based on what you find out, we can recommend an alternative. Otherwise, if your grid is performing well, don't change it. Basically, but if you think it's not performing well, we need to figure out which part of it is causing the trouble, and then we can decide what's the best. Sometimes it's just a tiny styling change that makes a big difference. Okay, let's see. Do we have another? Oh, we have more. Now it's getting interesting. Okay. The next one I saw is, do you know if there is a way to substitute the default loading message in the new loading bar? Which is the new loading bar? I think we have multiple loading bars. We just try to demonstrate one, and maybe that's the one you mean. zk dot start processing. Do you mean this one? Oh, there's a zcos org block, a modern loading bar animation.
That message with this new loading bar.
You mean this one?
Yes.
Ah, you mean the new animation, loading bar control update. I don't know, what is the default message there? I think that's something we can test. Loading bar. So let me just check again. What was the question? Is there to substitute the default loading message? So you're not talking about this one, yeah? Not this one, not the loading animation.
I'm talking about that loading animation and replacing with the new loading bar. If it's possible to do that.
Okay, the loading bar itself is yes, why not? Because this one is just a CSS animation, yeah. So you can customize the CSS. If you see, this is a loading indicator and has a loading icon. For example, what you can do is loading indicator. Right now it has a padding and something. We just disable the padding, and we say width is 100%, and I say background color. I just try to do something. Okay, it didn't change, so there must be something around. There's a Z loading class and the Z proc. Which one is limiting the size? Top left. White space, no wrap. So
I recall there was a JavaScript in charge of putting those tags in the HTML, but I don't know if we can replace that JavaScript with another one, and we can implement the new loading bar instead of this processing message. That
okay, let's see. There is a start processing function at client side. Oh no, I need to enable the debug.js again. Let me just switch back to source code view, because I don't want minified code and none of the other ones. Because the problem is ZK has multiple loading things, loading animations. they happen in different times. So if we are not talking about the right one, we maybe just cover the wrong one. 9.10 and say, but if you want to customize this, it's usually a styling problem, a styling question, because there is JavaScript that generates these things, but then it will do nothing. The new loading bar itself, in my opinion, is just a div that is under 100% width and which has a background color gradient. That's what I would call it. So it's nothing else. It doesn't know anything about the loading state. It's a bar where you can say the bar is at 50% or 20% or 30%. So if you want something animated, we need to implement some kind of animation. Okay, now we have the processing function. And here you see where it's going. Yeah, what is it doing? It says ZK processing true, and then it's calling a method start the processing delay before showing the demo. Show PRBVP, and then there's the end processing, which is clear timeout, and it's destroying the processing box. ZUTL. In some way, it must be creating a. Oh, I don't know the exact source code of this. But basically, this one is a CSS style you can change. Yeah. I just don't know. I just didn't find the width of it right now. Top left 0. Width 100%. Ah, okay. Now we have 100%. Cool. And now you could say the loading indicator, instead of being a loading icon, we just disable this one. No. We could say display none, so because we don't want the image, and instead the loading indicator can be it can have a background, let's say background image, and then we have a linear gradient, and this can be an animated gradient, and then you can just adjust the height of it slightly and make it less tall, and then just make an animated linear gradient via CSS, and then you have some kind of like the Knight Rider, you know, the Knight Rider animation of the car. You can make a CSS animation that looks differently. So it's the Z loading indicator style, and the previous one is the Z loading, where you can specify a different width. Yeah. And you can center this somewhere, you can put it somewhere else on the screen. I think there's even a configuration to put this in a different location that specifies the top left. But if you want a custom animation, you have the freedom of CSS here. And I think you don't need JavaScript to make a loading animation. The thing is, right now it's just spinning. And instead, if you have a linear gradient that animates from left to right, because you don't have any percentage, you don't know when it's done. You can just specify any kind of animation. And if you want to make it a small bar at the top, it's just a div with a background color and a gradient that maybe starts from 0. Oh no, we need the 90 degree. It needs to be linear, and then we say it starts with blue at 10%, and then it goes to blue maybe 50%, and then it goes white 50%, and it goes transparent. So and then now we have a 50% loading bar. Yeah. And if these 50%, if these are animated values, you can have CSS animations that animate between different gradient positions. You can have a bar that somehow moves with any kind of steps here. And the message, I think the message you can customize. There's a label for it. Okay, let's see if we can find something else. Okay, do you know if there's any way to substitute the loading? Yes, definitely. But adding the new component, I think, is not helpful because the component offers a Java control over such a loading bar. And in your case, if you just want the loading animation that doesn't happen without any server-side interaction, you don't need the Java API for it. You just need the CSS, and which is a div with a background color up to a certain position or an animated position. Yeah, so it's much easier than you think. And you make it 3 pixels wide, and just make something that flashes left, right, left, right. I think this could look quite nicely, but I'm not a designer. Yeah, your designers will tell you what they want, and maybe I can help in a dedicated support ticket, for example, with customizing the styles if this is not fully clear. Okay, then there is last question we can maybe cover is, I feel comfortable with the MVC pattern over MVVM pattern, but there are some components like chosen box where I don't have a way to add values manually. I have to make a new list of elements and pass this list as the selected values. This is because of the design of the component, or maybe because ZK is looking to move MVVM pattern. No, I heard this this kind of fear or this kind of misunderstanding a lot. MVC, MVVM, we think we don't favor one over the other. This is a matter of style and taste, what you prefer. Of course, obviously, we put a lot of effort into MVVM in making and offering this pattern, so that we provided lots of examples for it. But still, the underlying mechanism is always MVC. So MVC is never replaced. MVVM is always built on top of MVC. And MVVM is just an extra layer that helps to control the MVC automatically. So if you prefer to use MVC, keep the MVC. If you're familiar with MVC, that's perfect. This will help you build applications more quickly and especially avoid confusion. So if you don't mix the patterns, that's perfect. And if you find an example in MVVM, just think of any kind of load and save binding is just an automatic way of calling getters and setters. Yeah, so if you call a setter getter in MVC, it's equivalent to this kind of binding, which is calling set get value, or here this one is just calling set value. Yeah, it's loading from your data and setting it into the label. So if you're happy with calling label set value, it will do exactly the same thing as the MVVM. MVVM will just do this automatically whenever this property is notified. With chosen box, you don't have a choice to add the elements directly. I think you mean you have to provide a list model for the chosen box, and yeah, that's there by design. I think this is not MVVM specific. This is a pattern coming from the, or similar to what is available at the Java Swing or Java AWT from this kind of libraries, very similar to this. Having this kind of data models just helps helps to have to control all the components. Especially chosen box, normally because you have to create and remove elements very quickly. We didn't implement the chosen box item component because it doesn't really help. What you need is the value, and the value is in the model, and how the value is displayed is what the component does. And you don't need MVVM to control the chosen box, just need the model with the items. So using a list model list is not the same as MVVM. And I would always suggest using list models because they help a lot abstracting the work of having to create list items manually, unless you really want to create list items manually a lot, or combo items, or in the case of chosen box, we don't have the chosen box item, so you need to use the list model list. And really, list models, I like them a lot. They help even in MVC. It's not an MVVM only task, so don't worry about MVVM pattern. It's not going to replace MVC. MVC is always under the hood. And if some components require a data model, which is not the same as a view model, then the data model is controlling the component. So don't worry about this one.
Okay. Thank you.
And then, all right. So yeah, even if we create too many examples, they are mostly because MVVM is more complicated to think about, so it just requires more examples. If people want to switch to MVVM, but it's not really the favorite. It's just something that needs more explanation. And so keep your MVC. I'm happy to support you with MVC. All right, I think we had a few interesting questions. Time is almost up. If you like this this kind of format of 3 questions, I think we can have this more often. Just let our just respond, give us some feedback if you like. If you think it's not enough time, or if we need more time, any kind of feedback will help. And if you're interested in the project, I think I will share the project. But right now, today we didn't do a lot in the project. It's just the project. I can share it, and then you can have the source code. But it's basically just an empty clone of the ZK Gradle project. The ZK Gradle example, ZK Gradle. I think it's just here. ZK Gradle release here on GitHub. So it's a clone of this project. So somehow, but I'll provide it. Okay. Yes. Okay. Cool. Perfect. I think I'll stop the recording, and if you still have a few questions in the chat, I'll leave the chat running so I can gather all this feedback, and we'll also share the chat in the end. So I'll say bye-bye for now, but I keep the chat open for a few more minutes. Okay.